Finish your meal, Alcaraz said, his tone calm, almost gentle. He nudged Tony Gardner's plate closer, rack of ribs barely touched, sauce congealing under the warm glow of the chandelier. April 17th, 2025, Carmine's on 5th. The restaurant was packed with well-dressed professionals celebrating promotions, anniversaries, small victories, but every table had gone quiet. Everyone knew what was happening at table 5. The man seated there, Tony Gardner, was pale, hands trembling so badly his fork clattered against the porcelain. Sweat beaded at his temples despite the air conditioning. He was the one who'd sold out his boss 12 years ago, the one who handed over ledgers, safe houses, and names to rival families and federal agents, the one who disappeared into witness protection and convinced himself that disappearing meant surviving. I said, "Finish," Alcaraz repeated. This time, his free hand drifted to the razor, not raising it, not threatening, just acknowledging its presence, because this is your last meal in peace. For 12 years, Tony Gardner had lived like a man who'd won. Every Tuesday and Friday night, he dined at Carmine's on 5th, always requesting table 5 in the back corner. He wore tailored suits that cost $3,000, drove a Tesla Model S, lived in a penthouse with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. He had a wife who never asked questions, a corporate consulting job that required no real work, and the comfortable illusion that distance plus time equaled safety. Tony had built all of this on the foundation Alcaraz Paulo left behind: the connections, the infrastructure, the respect. He'd taken everything he'd created and claimed it as his own, then sold it for immunity and a government stipend. And for 12 years, while Alcaraz rebuilt his empire in silence, Tony had slept peacefully. Until April 14th, 2025. That was the day Alcaraz received confirmation of Tony's location, not from informants or surveillance, but from Tony's own predictable routine. Same restaurant, same table, same night. Alcaraz didn't bring an army. He brought 2 enforcers, a straight razor, and 12 years of patience finally reaching its expiration date. 12 years earlier, Alcaraz Paulo ruled his world with quiet precision. He didn't shout, didn't threaten, didn't need to prove his authority by breaking bones in back alleys or leaving bodies as warnings. Alcaraz's power came from something more dangerous than violence. It came from certainty. Everyone under him knew the rules, everyone knew the price of breaking them, and more importantly, everyone knew that Alcaraz Paulo never forgot a debt, never ignored a slight, and never made threats he didn't intend to keep. That kind of reputation doesn't come from chaos, it comes from structure. While other bosses ran their operations like street gangs, impulsive, reactive, brutal, Alcaraz ran his like a corporation. Ledgers were balanced to the dollar, routes were optimized for efficiency, payoffs were scheduled with the precision of a Swiss watch. Loyalty wasn't demanded through fear alone, it was cultivated through fairness, consistency, and the unspoken promise that if you kept your word, Alcaraz would protect you. Break your word, however, and the protection disappeared. Rivals respected him because he didn't waste their time with posturing. Subordinates trusted him because he paid what he promised and punished only what deserved punishment. Law enforcement struggled with him because there was no chaos to exploit, no emotional outbursts to leverage, no pattern of recklessness to predict. Alcaraz Paulo was 43 years old in 2013, lean and sharp-eyed, with the kind of stillness that made people nervous. He wore simple suits, charcoal, navy, black, and carried only one weapon that anyone ever saw: a razor. Not a gun, not a knife, a razor. It had belonged to his father, passed down as both tool and symbol. Alcaraz kept it folded in his inside jacket pocket, always within reach, rarely used. But when it came out, everyone understood what it meant: discipline, memory, permanence. The razor didn't kill quickly. It marked, it reminded, it left scars that told stories long after wounds healed. Alcaraz had used it 3 times in 15 years. Each time, the message was received clearly enough that he never had to repeat himself. Among his inner circle, Tony Gardner was considered the smartest. He'd started as a low-level accountant, cleaning money through shell companies and real estate holdings. But Tony had a gift for numbers, for seeing patterns where others saw noise. Within 2 years, Alcaraz promoted him to financial lieutenant, the man who managed routes, payoffs, bribes, and the intricate web of transactions that kept the operation invisible to federal auditors. Tony sat in meetings where Alcaraz discussed territorial boundaries with rival families. He knew which cops were paid, which judges were compromised, which safe houses held emergency cash. He knew the names of suppliers, the schedules of shipments, the locations of backup operations. He knew everything, and Alcaraz trusted him. That trust, as it turned out, was Tony's first mistake. Alcaraz's second mistake was believing loyalty and intelligence always traveled together. On a cold November night in 2013, Alcaraz called Tony into his office, a modest space above a dry cleaner on 9th Avenue, soundproofed and unremarkable. "You've earned this," Alcaraz said, sliding a set of keys across the desk. Tony stared at them. "What are these?" "Access to the primary safe house, the one on Lexington." Tony's throat tightened. The Lexington safe house wasn't just money, it was the operational heart. Files, contacts, contingency plans. "You're putting me closer than anyone else," Tony said carefully. Alcaraz met his eyes. "Closer than is safe," he agreed, "but you've earned it." Tony took the keys, and somewhere deep in his chest, ambition began whispering louder than loyalty. Tony Gardner held more secrets than any man in Alcaraz Paulo's organization. He knew the exact locations of 6 safe houses scattered across 3 boroughs. He knew which police captains received envelopes every month, which federal agents looked the other way for the right price, which judges had gambling debts that made them cooperative. He managed the ledgers, every transaction, every route, every name that mattered. When shipments moved, Tony scheduled them. When territory shifted, Tony calculated the financial impact. When bribes needed to be paid, Tony decided how much and to whom. Alcaraz had given him the keys to the kingdom, and for 3 years Tony had been a faithful steward. But access breeds familiarity, familiarity breeds comfort, and comfort eventually breeds resentment. Tony started noticing things he'd been too grateful to see before. He worked 18-hour days while Alcaraz appeared for 3-hour meetings. He balanced books down to the penny, while others collected paychecks for muscle work that required no real intelligence. He structured deals that generated millions, and his cut, though generous, felt suddenly inadequate compared to the risk he carried. "I'm the one who makes this work," Tony thought, staring at spreadsheets at 2 in the morning. "Without me, this entire operation collapses." The thoughts came slowly at first, whispers during sleepless nights, justifications that felt reasonable in isolation. "Alcaraz trusts me because I'm valuable, but what happens when I'm not? What happens when he decides I know too much?" Tony had seen what happened to people who knew too much. He'd watched Alcaraz calmly end careers, relationships, lives, always with that same quiet precision. No anger, no explanation, just action. "I'm not protected by loyalty, I'm protected by usefulness. The second that changes, I'm a liability." The fear settled in his chest like cold steel. Then came the first contact. A rival family, Castellano's people, approached Tony outside a coffee shop in March 2013. The conversation was brief, polite, and terrifying. "We're not asking you to do anything yet," the man said, sliding a business card across the table. "Just want you to know there are options. Alcaraz isn't the only game in town." Tony burned the card that night, but he memorized the number first. 2 months later, federal agents pulled Tony over for a broken taillight. The stop took 40 minutes. No ticket was issued. Instead, an agent named Rourke sat in the passenger seat and asked careful questions.
"We're building a case," Rourke said. "RICO charges, wire fraud, racketeering. We've got surveillance, financial records, testimony from smaller players. What we don't have is someone on the inside." "I'm not interested," Tony said immediately. "You should be," Rourke handed him a folder. "Because when we take Alcaraz down, everyone close to him goes down too, unless they cooperate." Tony didn't open the folder until he got home. Inside were surveillance photos, ledgers with his handwriting, transaction records with his initials, enough evidence to put him away for 20 years. "Unless I cooperate." Tony sat in his apartment that night, staring at two paths: stay loyal and risk Alcaraz eventually deciding he knew too much, or flip and trade everything for immunity, protection, and a future where he didn't wake up every morning wondering if today was the day the razor came out. The Castellanos had already offered him money. The feds had offered him freedom. Alcaraz had only ever offered him trust. And trust, Tony realized with cold clarity, wasn't enough to protect him anymore. For the first time, Tony Gardner understood something dangerous. Betrayal wasn't just possible, it was profitable. Tony Gardner made his decision on a Tuesday, not in a moment of panic or rage, but in the cold, calculated silence of his apartment at 3 a.m. He sat at his kitchen table with a laptop, a burner phone, and a choice that couldn't be unmade. He called Agent Rourke first. "I need full immunity," Tony said. "Witness protection, new identity, relocation out of state, non-negotiable." Rourke didn't hesitate. "Done. What do we get?" "Everything." And Tony meant it. Over the next 72 hours, Tony handed over 13 years of operational intelligence. He gave the feds locations of all 6 safe houses, including the primary one on Lexington Avenue. He provided schedules for upcoming shipments, dates, times, routes, drivers. He named every cop on Alcaraz's payroll, every judge who'd been compromised, every federal agent who'd looked the other way. He delivered ledgers with transaction histories going back a decade, shell companies, offshore accounts, real estate holdings used for laundering, the entire financial architecture of Alcaraz Paulo's empire mapped in meticulous detail. Then he called the Castellanos. "I'll give you his protection network," Tony said, "but I want $200,000 cash, untraceable." They paid him in a duffel bag the next morning. Tony gave them the names of Alcaraz's most trusted enforcers, the backup communication channels, the safe routes through rival territories. He handed them everything they'd need to move into Alcaraz's territory the moment federal raids created the chaos. By Friday night, Tony Gardner was gone. No goodbye, no final meeting, no message left behind. Just absence. Alcaraz Paulo knew something was wrong before the first raid happened. It started small, a shipment that never arrived, a safe house that went dark without explanation, a police captain who stopped returning calls. Then, on Saturday morning, federal agents hit 3 locations simultaneously: the Lexington safe house, the warehouse in Red Hook, the dry cleaner on 9th Avenue where Alcaraz kept his office. They found ledgers, cash, files, everything. Alcaraz watched the news footage from a backup location, his face expressionless, his mind calculating. Someone had given them the exact locations, someone who knew the schedules, someone with access to everything. "Where's Tony?" Alcaraz asked his second-in-command, a man named Reyes. Reyes checked his phone, called Tony's number. Nothing. "He's not answering. Find him." By Sunday, the answer was clear. Tony Gardner had vanished. His apartment was empty, lease terminated, bank accounts closed, phone disconnected. No body, no trace. Just gone. The underworld moved fast.
Within 48 hours, the Castellanos pushed into 2 of Alcaraz's territories. Smaller crews sensed weakness and stopped paying tribute. Rivals whispered that Alcaraz Paulo had been broken, betrayed from the inside, gutted by the feds, weakened beyond recovery. Some expected him to lash out immediately, burn the city looking for Tony, start a war with the Castellanos, make someone pay in blood and fire. But Alcaraz Paulo did none of those things. Instead, he went quiet. He shut down operations temporarily, paid out severance to soldiers who wanted to leave, consolidated what remained, rebuilt in silence. No retaliation, no rage, no visible response. The underworld interpreted this as defeat. They were wrong. Alcaraz Paulo wasn't defeated, he was patient. And everyone, rivals, subordinates, Tony Gardner himself, waited for the explosion that never came. They waited for Alcaraz to respond violently, desperately, emotionally. They didn't understand that Alcaraz Paulo didn't operate on emotion, he operated on certainty. And he was certain of one thing: Tony Gardner would eventually get comfortable, and when he did, Alcaraz would be waiting. Alcaraz Paulo closed his empire for 6 months, not destroyed, not dismantled, closed. He paid severance to soldiers who'd served loyally, released enforcers from their obligations, quietly dissolved partnerships that no longer served him. He restructured everything: new safe houses, new communication channels, new financial routes that didn't depend on anyone who'd worked with Tony Gardner. Most importantly, he tested loyalty. Alcaraz reached out to every person who'd been part of his inner circle, offered them opportunities to leave with dignity or stay and rebuild. He watched carefully who flinched, who hesitated, who asked too many questions about Tony's whereabouts. 3 men failed the test. They disappeared quietly, not killed, relocated with a clear understanding that their names were now cataloged in Alcaraz's memory. The rest stayed, rebuilt, waited for orders that came slowly, methodically, without urgency. Rivals watched this restraint and misread it completely. Tony Gardner broke him, they whispered. Alcaraz is finished. The rumors spread across the underworld like wildfire. Tony had won. The great Alcaraz Paulo, legendary for his precision and control, had been gutted from the inside and didn't have the strength to retaliate. Alcaraz heard the rumors and smiled. Let them believe weakness. Let them think betrayal went unpunished. Let the lie spread until it became accepted truth. Because Alcaraz Paulo understood something most people didn't. Revenge isn't a sprint, it's an investment. 2,000 miles away, Tony Gardner started building his new life.
The federal government gave him a new name, Michael Brennan, new social security number, new driver's license, new history scrubbed clean of any connection to Alcaraz Paulo or the life he'd left behind. They relocated him to a mid-sized city where nobody knew his face, set him up with a consulting job that required minimal work and paid well enough to maintain comfort, provided a modest house in a quiet neighborhood. For the first year, Tony lived like a man in witness protection should, paranoid, careful, constantly looking over his shoulder. He changed routes to work daily, never ate at the same restaurant twice, kept minimal social contact, checked door locks 3 times before bed. But time has a way of eroding vigilance. By year 2, Tony met a woman at a corporate mixer. She was kind, uncomplicated, asked no difficult questions about his past. They married within 8 months. By year 5, Tony had routines: favorite coffee shop, preferred grocery store, weekly dinners at the same handful of restaurants. By year 10, Tony had forgotten what fear felt like. He convinced himself the past was buried. Alcaraz was either dead, imprisoned, or had moved on. The federal investigation had collapsed Alcaraz's empire completely. Tony had read the reports himself. There was nothing left to come back from. I won, Tony told himself every night before falling asleep in his comfortable bed beside his unsuspecting wife. I got away with it. Meanwhile, Alcaraz Paulo cataloged information. Not frantically, not desperately.
patiently. He tracked federal witness protection patterns, studied relocation protocols, maintained quiet contacts with people who owed him favors in distant cities. He didn't chase Tony Gardner, he waited for Tony to reveal himself through the slow accumulation of comfort and routine. Alcaraz rebuilt his empire carefully over 12 years, smaller, quieter, more efficient. He operated with the same precision that had defined him before, but now with the added discipline of a man who'd learned that patience was the sharpest blade. And when the information finally came, a confirmed sighting, a name cross-referenced, a routine identified, Alcaraz Paulo finally made his reservation. The confirmation arrived on a Tuesday morning in March 2025. A single photograph, texted from an unlisted number. Tony Gardner, older, grayer, wearing an expensive suit, entering Carmine's on 5th with a woman on his arm. The timestamp showed Friday, 7:47 p.m. Alcaraz Paulo studied the image for exactly 30 seconds. Then he deleted it. He didn't need the photo anymore. He'd already memorized every detail. The way Tony still checked the entrance reflexively before sitting down, the confident posture of a man who believed he was safe, the table number visible in the background. Table 5, back corner. Alcaraz made a single phone call. "I need 2 people," he said. "Well-dressed, discreet, no weapons except what I provide. When? I'll let you know." Alcaraz hung up. He didn't scramble, didn't rush, didn't assemble an army or plan an elaborate assault. He simply waited for the right Thursday.
Not Friday, Tony's predictable night. Thursday would catch him comfortable but not quite expecting anything. The restaurant would be full but not packed, enough witnesses to make the moment impossible to hide, but not so crowded that chaos could provide escape. Alcaraz chose April 17th for no particular reason except that it felt correct. He packed a single item in his inside jacket pocket, the straight razor that had belonged to his father, the same razor he'd carried for 30 years, the same blade that had marked 3 other men who'd forgotten what loyalty meant. He didn't sharpen it, the edge was already perfect. Thursday, April 17th, 7:30 p.m. Tony Gardner kissed his wife goodbye at the front door of their penthouse. "Don't wait up," he said cheerfully. "Jim's running late, so dinner might go long." She smiled, trusting, oblivious. "Have fun." Tony drove his Tesla to Carmine's, listening to a podcast about real estate investment strategies. He felt good, healthy, successful, secure. 12 years had turned witness protection into a distant memory, something that had happened to a different version of himself. At 7:45 p.m., Tony walked into Carmine's and was greeted immediately by the maitre d'. "Mr. Brennan, wonderful to see you. Table 5 is ready." Tony smiled. "Perfect." He settled into his usual seat, back corner, view of the entrance, white tablecloth perfectly pressed. He ordered his usual bourbon, scanned the menu he'd memorized years ago, and checked his phone for messages. The restaurant hummed with the comfortable noise of success. Clinking glasses, quiet laughter, the soft murmur of business deals and anniversary celebrations. Tony felt safe. 3 blocks away, Alcaraz Paulo stepped out of a black sedan. He wore a simple charcoal suit, no tie, polished shoes that made no sound on the sidewalk. Behind him, 2 men in similar attire followed at a respectful distance. Enforcers chosen not for their capacity for violence, but for their ability to look like ordinary diners. Alcaraz checked his watch. 8:03 p.m. Tony would be halfway through his first drink by now, relaxed, guard completely down. Alcaraz walked toward Carmine's with the same unhurried precision he'd maintained for 12 years. His hand rested lightly against his inside pocket, feeling the familiar weight of the razor. Not a weapon of execution, a tool of memory. At 8:06 p.m., Alcaraz Paulo reached the entrance of Carmine's on 5th. He paused for exactly 3 seconds, not from hesitation, but from the simple pleasure of a long-delayed promise finally being kept. Then he opened the door and stepped inside. The maitre d' looked up.
and somewhere deep in the restaurant, at table 5 in the back corner, Tony Gardner was about to learn that 12 years wasn't nearly long enough. Tony saw him before he heard him, a figure moving through the restaurant with unhurried precision, cutting through the ambient noise like a blade through silk. The maitre d' stepped aside without being asked. Waiters pivoted mid-step to clear a path. And then Alcaraz Paulo was standing beside table 5. Tony's bourbon glass stopped halfway to his lips. His hand began trembling so violently the liquid sloshed against the rim. "Hello, Tony." The voice was exactly as Tony remembered, quiet, controlled, carrying the weight of certainty. Tony's throat closed. He tried again. "Alcaraz, I thought that I was dead?" Alcaraz pulled out the chair across from Tony and sat down smoothly, as if they were old friends reuniting. Behind Alcaraz, 2 men in dark suits positioned themselves near the table, not threatening, just present. Their hands rested casually at their sides, but Tony noticed the subtle adjustment of jackets, the telltale bulge of concealed weapons. The restaurant hadn't gone silent, but conversations had shifted. Eyes tracked toward table 5. Waitstaff moved more carefully. The pianist in the corner seemed to be playing softer.
"Finish your meal," Alcaraz said, gesturing to Tony's untouched plate. Rack of ribs, barely touched, sauce congealing. "I'm not hungry." "You should be." Alcaraz folded his hands on the table. "You've had 12 years to build an appetite." Tony's eyes darted toward the exit, 40 feet away, past 20 tables, through a crowded dining room. "Don't," Alcaraz said quietly. "It would be embarrassing for both of us." Tony's jaw worked soundlessly. Finally, "I can explain." "Please do." "I had no choice. The feds had evidence. They were going to bury me for 20 years unless I cooperated. I was protecting myself. By selling me. By surviving." Tony's voice cracked. "You would have done the same." Alcaraz tilted his head slightly. "Would I?" "Yes, anyone would. You can't tell me you wouldn't have." "I spent 11 years in a federal prison, Tony." Alcaraz's tone remained perfectly calm. "Never once gave up a name. Never once traded loyalty for convenience. So no, I wouldn't have done the same." Tony tried another angle. "It was 12 years ago, ancient history. You rebuilt. I heard you're more powerful now than you were before, so really I did you a favor." "A favor?" "Forced you to evolve, adapt. You're stronger because of what I—" "Stop." The single word cut through Tony's rationalization like glass. Alcaraz leaned forward. "You gave them 6 safe houses, 13 names, a decade of financial records. You handed the Castellanos my protection network for $200,000. His eyes never blinked. "Don't insult both of us by pretending this was anything except greed." Tony's face went pale. "How do you—" "I know everything, Tony. I've known for 8 years. I've been waiting for you to get comfortable enough to forget." The restaurant had gone quieter now. Diners weren't even pretending not to watch anymore. "Please," Tony whispered. "I have a wife, a life. I've changed. I'm not that person anymore." "You're exactly that person. You just have a different name." Alcaraz reached into his inside jacket pocket. Tony flinched violently, hands coming up defensively. But Alcaraz didn't pull a gun. He pulled out a straight razor. The blade caught the warm light of the chandelier, gleaming with the kind of edge that had been maintained with religious precision for 30 years. Tony's breath came in short, panicked gasps. "Alcaraz, please, don't. I'll disappear again. I'll go somewhere you'll never find me. I swear." "You already disappeared once, Tony. It didn't take." Alcaraz unfolded the razor slowly, deliberately. The restaurant froze completely now. No conversation, no clinking glasses. Even the pianist had stopped playing. 200 people watching a single table. Alcaraz stood up, razor held loosely in his right hand. "Stand up. Please, stand up." Tony's legs barely supported him as he rose, shaking so badly he had to grip the table for balance. Alcaraz moved around the table until they were face to face, and then, with the entire restaurant watching in perfect silence, Alcaraz Paulo raised the razor. The razor moved with surgical precision, not across the throat, though Tony flinched hard enough to expect it, across his left cheek. One smooth, deliberate motion, shallow enough not to kill, deep enough to scar permanently. Tony screamed. Blood ran down his face in a thin crimson line, soaking into the collar of his $3,000 suit. He stumbled backward, hands flying to his cheek, eyes wide with shock and pain. Alcaraz folded the razor calmly and returned it to his pocket. The restaurant remained frozen. 200 witnesses, none of them moving, none of them speaking. Phones stayed in pockets. No one called 911. No one intervened. They all understood what this was. Not murder, justice. Tony's hand came away red. He stared at the blood, then at Alcaraz, understanding dawning slowly through the pain. You're letting me live?" "Living," Alcaraz said quietly, "is your punishment." He stepped closer, lowering his voice so only Tony could hear, though the silence in the room was so complete that several nearby tables caught the words anyway. "Every morning you'll look in the mirror and see that scar. Every person you meet will ask about it. You'll have to lie, make up stories, relive this moment every single day for the rest of your life." Tony's breathing came in ragged gasps, blood still flowing between his fingers. "You wanted to disappear?" Alcaraz continued. "Disappear. But this time you'll do it marked. Everyone in the life will know what that scar means. Every city you run to, someone will recognize it. You'll never be anonymous again. You'll never be comfortable again." Alcaraz raised his voice, addressing not just Tony but the entire restaurant. "Let me be clear for everyone here. Tony Gardner betrayed the man who trusted him, sold loyalty for immunity, traded 13 years of brotherhood for a government check and a new name." His eyes swept across the room. "This is what happens to betrayers. Not death, memory." He turned back to Tony, whose legs finally gave out. Tony collapsed into his chair, hand still pressed against his bleeding cheek, tears mixing with blood. "You have 48 hours to leave this city. Take whatever you can carry. Leave everything else. If I see you or hear about you, or catch even a rumor that you've tried to contact anyone from your old life—" He left the threat unfinished. He didn't need to finish it. "Do you understand?" Tony nodded, unable to speak, unable to do anything except bleed and comprehend the full weight of his survival. Alcaraz Paulo adjusted his jacket, smoothed his lapels, and toward the exit. His 2 enforcers fell into step behind him. Neither had drawn their weapons, neither had needed to. As Alcaraz walked through the restaurant, the crowd parted instinctively. No one met his eyes. No one moved to stop him. The maitre d' held the door open without being asked. At 8:34 p.m., Alcaraz Paulo stepped out of Carmine's on 5th and disappeared into the night. Behind him, at table 5, Tony Gardner sat bleeding in front of a half-eaten rack of ribs. The scar was already beginning to form, and with it, the permanent memory of what happens when you betray a man like Alcaraz Paulo. The restaurant remained silent for another full minute. Then, slowly, conversations resumed. Waiters began moving again. The pianist started playing. But everyone there, every single witness, knew they'd just seen something they would never forget. By morning, the story would spread across every corner of the underworld. By noon, Tony Gardner would be gone, and Alcaraz Paulo's reputation would be restored without a single shot fired. By sunrise, Tony Gardner was gone. Not the careful, calculated disappearance of 12 years ago. This time, it was panicked, desperate, marked by the kind of terror that comes from knowing you've been given a gift you didn't deserve. He left the penthouse with a single suitcase, left his wife sleeping, unaware, left the Tesla in the garage, the consulting job, the comfortable routines that had taken 12 years to build. He caught a 6 a.m. bus heading west with a bandage covering his left cheek and a new understanding that survival wasn't mercy, it was a life sentence. Every person who saw that scar would know. Every city he ran to would eventually whisper the story. Tony Gardner, the man who betrayed Alcaraz Paulo and lived to carry the proof. The underworld reacted within hours. By noon Friday, every policy banker, enforcer, and street-level operator in 3 states had heard what happened at Table 5. The details spread like wildfire, not through official channels, but through the oldest network that exists, witnesses who couldn't stay quiet. Alcaraz walked into Carmine's, didn't bring an army, just walked in, marked the traitor in front of 200 people, and walked out. No shooting, no chaos, just the razor and a message. The story grew with each telling, but the core remained unchanged. Alcaraz Paulo had returned, not with violence, not with war, with patience, precision, and the kind of calculated power that made men reconsider their choices. Within 72 hours, 3 planned betrayals quietly dissolved. 2 informants reconsidered their federal deals. A rival family that had been moving into Alcaraz's old territory pulled back without explanation. Fear had returned to its proper place, not as chaos, but as respect. By the end of the month, every piece of Alcaraz's empire had been quietly restored. Territories that had been contested for 12 years suddenly became uncontested. Protection payments resumed without negotiation. The Castellanos sent a representative with an apology and an envelope, tribute for encroaching on boundaries they should have respected. Alcaraz accepted both. No war, no bloodshed, no army required, just 1 night, 1 restaurant, 1 razor. Alcaraz Paulo sat in his rebuilt office, different location, same precision, and considered what the last 12 years had taught him. Power isn't about who strikes fastest, it's about who strikes correctly. Revenge taken in anger is satisfying but temporary. Revenge taken with patience becomes legend. The underworld had assumed his silence meant weakness. They'd been wrong. Silence had been strategy. Restraint had been weapon. Time had been the sharpest blade of all. Tony Gardner had stolen 12 years from him, years that should have been spent building, consolidating, expanding. But those same 12 years had taught Alcaraz something more valuable than any territory, that true power doesn't demand immediate satisfaction. It waits, it catalogs, it remembers, and when the moment arrives, not rushed, not forced but inevitable, it acts with the kind of precision that can't be forgotten. Somewhere on a bus heading toward a city he'd never been to, Tony Gardner touched the bandage on his cheek and understood that he would never stop running, not from Alcaraz, from memory.
Back at Carmine's on 5th, Table 5 remained empty for 3 weeks before management quietly resumed taking reservations for it. But everyone who worked there remembered. Everyone who'd witnessed that Thursday night remembered. And in the years that followed, when young hustlers asked old-timers about loyalty and betrayal, they always told the same story. Table 5. The razor, the man who thought 12 years was long enough, the man who learned that some debts don't expire. Because Alcaraz Paulo had proven something that night that every person in the life eventually learns. You can outrun time. You can change your name, your city, your entire life, but you can't outrun memory. And memory, in the hands of a patient man, is the most dangerous weapon of all. If this story of patience, precision, and inevitable justice kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button. Subscribe for more tales from the underworld, where loyalty is currency and memory never forgets. And turn on the notification bell so you never miss when the next chapter drops. Because in this world, the best stories aren't the ones that end quickly, they're the ones that know how to wait. What would you have done in Tony's position? Let us know in the comments below.